The Sunday Paper Review on Off the Ball.
Brought to you by Centra. Kick off with a cold one. Over 18s only. Drink responsibly. Get the facts. Visit drinkaware.ie.
This is News Talk.
It is indeed, and it is a Sunday Paper Review. Adrian with you today, the 8th of February, would you believe? And I hope all is well with you, wherever you be in the world at the minute. Delighted to say we're joined in the studio by the sports writer, columnist of the year, sports writer of the year, Roy Curtis. How are you doing?
I'm very well, and I like introductions like that. If you want to repeat that in case anyone didn't hear.
Repeat ad nauseum over the course of the next
I can't wait for my introduction now.
Former Ireland and Munster prop, and has been the Munster head coach, currently Old Belvedere head coach, Fiona Hayes. How are you?
Good.
Thanks a million for coming in.
No problem.
We are, as you heard from the very start there, brought to you Sunday Paper Review and Off the Ball, partnership with Centra. Make sure your fridge is match ready to kick off with a cold one. Over 18s only. Drink responsibly, get the facts, and visit drinkaware.ie. We'll tell you what's happening across the sports pages to begin with, and then we'll get into the meat and drink. As you can imagine, I was trying to think, Roy, Thursday for a considered piece. Like a Friday is night. Saturday's too tight.
Yeah.
Friday is probably about ideal, and Thursday is nearly a little bit too long for those sort of really considered pieces.
It was a really interesting one from a newspaper point of view in changing times. I mean, game finishing up after 10 o'clock on Thursday night. The newspapers were actually holding back print deadlines. We live more in an online age. It was made for considered Saturday pieces, but I think there's a real mixture of stuff in today's paper, and that sense of arriving at an inflection point in the story of Irish rugby really is everywhere. It's almost like we're mourning the revoking of the visa to that wonderland that yielded Grand Slams and that series victories in South Africa, albeit not in the World Cup. We're coming to terms with a new reality today.
Well, hold that thought. Funny, a lot of the papers, the Sunday Times is definitely one of the exceptions. They reject the idea of leading with the rugby, but as I said, that's where the Sunday Times begins. What now is the question that I think we're all asking ourselves at the minute. Peter O'Reilly, Shane Horgan, David Walsh on the task facing Andy Farrell's side, and more on that inside. And then also a teaser to me and McLean, Paul Rowan on the truth about why the Derry City player won't talk to him. I have to say, when that flashed up in our WhatsApp group earlier, I was like, dispense with everything else. Let me into that. The Mail on Sunday, a rebel edge. Ben O'Connor doubles down with call for a good, hard, physical game. Obviously, in the aftermath of the game at Super Valley Porky Queeve yesterday, Cork 7-point win in the end. Rebels without a pause. Cork get one over Tip and keep up winning run. Goes to Sunday Independent today. And there's a lot of work to do in Sis Carrick. Interim boss not carried away after another United win, writes Sam Wallace there. And Paul Kimmage then takes over, hold the back page today. Small pictures remain as vivid as ever, and we will get into that in a bit. Cloud 9 goes the Sun. Zubimendi and Coles lead their largest since 0-4 title win. Arsenal stormed 9 points clear at the top of the Premier League after their biggest lead since they last won the title in 2004. I think the inference being, what could possibly go wrong? We will see over the next while. The Sunday People, let's carry it through. Bruno calls interim boss Carrick great as United find the magic formula, and Mo's our number Ron. An exclusive here, Mo Salah will be offered the chance to become the new face of the Saudi Pro League in the summer. This is a story that just refuses to go away. He's 33 and they're looking to treble his 400 grand a week wage at Liverpool if he accepts a proposal. Huh?
Only
Nice.
old Belvedere.
Yeah. Not far off that myself, you're dead right.
Saudi Salah swoop. Legend wanted to replace striking Ron on treble his cop wages. Ronaldo, of course, has had his little bit of a falling out there during the week, and this could be the perfect fit. Bruno Carrick destined for great heights, and I just wanted to mention as well the front page of the Sunday Independent, because they've gone with the Winter Olympics on it here, and it is a great photograph. The Winter Olympics is such a fertile ground for photos like this, and it's Cormac Comerford of Team Ireland competing at the men's downhill on day one of the Olympics in Italy yesterday, and I just wanted to mention that because I just thought it was a good photograph. Simple as that. So we'll start with the rugby, if that's all right. Fiona, you might kick off with yourself.
Yeah.
A lot of coverage today. Up to this point, it's felt like we've been having a discussion about, are we in a hole? Everybody's sort of a little bit unsure of it. Like, a lot of theories across the pages today as to what's wrong. The main consensus is that there is something wrong, that it's big, and that it's likely going to take a bit of time to get right.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and I think I'm one of those people as well that was thinking, they can get into a bit of form. But now you're looking at, the question is, how can so many players be out of form? There's obviously something going wrong. Attack has been spoken about a lot, but after the game at the weekend, it was defence that killed me. Those missed tackles. When you associate with Irish rugby, it's not something you'd really say physically. We pride ourselves on defence at maul time, defence at line out, and certainly around the pitch. And I think that's where a lot of people are scratching their heads. We know Andy Farrell is an unbelievable man manager, so it's kind of that question now: is it the talent or what's going on? Is it the coaching staff? There's so many questions, but you're spot on, Adrian. There's definitely a hole there. And do you know what? I don't know if you agree, Roy, but reading Bernard Jackman's, and obviously I'm involved in rugby a long time, I'd be a bit outside the box in my thinking, a bit quirky in how I try and approach the game. And certainly I found in the system, it's he touches on it, it's black or white, and that grey area is what's letting us down. And I think the game has gone full circle now, where it's almost back to jouer, play it. It's not, it is structured in how people obviously set up, but I think the individuals are getting the games won, and that talent, and we've seen it in France from an early age, how they play. They're still playing the same way at 20s and at senior rugby. We go up, and it's so structured, and it has worked, but it's changed now, and we don't have the skill set to deal with it.
I think Bernard's piece is very interesting when he talks about that grey area. And you see it more and more in a lot of sports. I mean, Gaelic football had become overly structured, and the rules changes have allowed individuals of exceptional talent to turn games. And I think we saw that with France on Thursday night, that if you trust players, that if you allow them, I mean, Rory O'Connor has a piece today where he talks about the need to be innovative and he said Ireland are dedicated to a system built around a player they can't replace, Johnny Sexton, and no one is strong enough to suggest going another way. The culture appears to be very much top down. He goes on to add, under Farrell, they established such a clear playing identity between 2021 to 2024, but that's long gone. So there is that sense of a need for change. The piece that most struck me today was David Walsh's piece. And it's titled, Ireland's greatest era is over, but we're nowhere near nadir of the 1990s. The piece reads like an obituary for a fallen friend, really. He talks about the feeling he had watching the game from afar on Thursday was the feeling you get tuning into an online funeral and knowing you should be there. What's interesting is David, and I covered the Irish rugby team from the late 1980s and was at a lot of those games where it was really one slaughter after another. We were at the basement looking up with no real hope of climbing. There was a level of dysfunction that was all-encompassing, and the successes we've enjoyed over the last 10 or 15 years were unimaginable. And David references so many of those dark days and talks about how the last 10, 15 years for him were enriched by memories of what it had been like in the decades that preceded the days of summer. As Max Boyce used to say, I was there. And he talks about the great Ned Van Esbeck, who was the Irish Times rugby correspondent for many, many years, and who would lead the interrogations at post-match press conferences, always with the same opening question to the management. Do you think it will be hard to lift the boys after this defeat? And it was sort of a slightly running joke amongst people that this would be the first question. And David talks about, we heard it so many times. On this particular occasion, hearing Ned again ask the question caused two of us to laugh so hard. We were biting our lower lips to stop, but convulsing shoulders gave the game away. To the point that Jerry Murphy, the Irish coach, actually walked out of the press conference because he thought the joke was on him. But David continues and talks about, that the signposts have been there in how the provinces have been doing this year, and obviously in a disappointing autumn. But finishes, he says, restoration will take years, not months, and says to the players and coaches who gave us the days of summer, thanks. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, in that we were talking off air about the Dublin football team, and when you lose an aura how quickly you can fall back into the pack. And the question is, if you leave the World Cup aside, and it's very difficult to leave the World Cup aside because it's the ultimate barometer of how a team is faring, but if you leave that aside, the achievements both from the provinces and the international team over the last 15 years have been like nothing we achieved before. We're a small nation. We see where Wales are now, a similarly sized nation in which rugby was essentially a religion. Yeah. And they are broken. We're still, David's making the point, we're still a long way from that. But it is very hard to accept when you've had an era of continuous success that the reality going forward for years rather than months is probably going to be one where we're no longer at that level.
Jesus, stop the tapes, lads. This is.
I'm going to cry here beside you, right? But just even on that as well, like, you know, when you're looking, like, it might be something good. Are we almost a little bit arrogant ourselves to go into a game? And we obviously have a game plan, and we'll say that contestable box kick. We go into that game, but is there a sense of arrogance that we don't change the game plan? That we think, oh, okay, it is going to kick in. We're good at this. This will happen. Whereas maybe it's this game in particular has changed how we need to start thinking. If things aren't working, we're not that good to be able to fix it. We've now got to go to a different place and change things up and just have a bit of variety to the game.
You might call it arrogance and they might call it belief. If we keep doing this thing, it'll come off. But I mean, look at evidence in the face of belief, as in we were talking outside about, you know, the number of box kicks from the game the other day, and they're just not coming off. There is a point within that where you... plan B, I suppose, is ultimately what you're talking about there, is it? Is that
and just and I know Andy Dunn was on just to touch on, so, like, he was saying, oh, France kicked the same amount as Ireland, so the statistics were there. But the variety of France's kicking was different. We did the same kick over and over again.
They also won it back almost every time.
They did, but it was almost like so that I'll give you a quick example. I don't want to be getting into it, but there was a long and on where we know Thomas Ramos caught it and Ringrose went up, and everyone was like, "Oh, so close." But if you actually look at the picture and you pause it, Ramos knew we were going to do that. He was so deep. He was 5 metres out from their line. Everyone else was just outside of 22. There was so much space in behind. A grubber, a little dink over the top. But it was almost like, we're just going to hit it up here because that's what we've been doing all game. So it's France variety. And I felt on the day... Yes, I agree with kicking. You don't want to be going into those collisions, but just a bit of variety would have been more exciting to watch.
Can I ask you one of that? Because, like, Andy Farrell is a smart cookie.
Yeah.
He's one of the most highly rated coaches on the planet. Like, I hope Farrell commits to being part of the renewal, writes David Walsh, because he's an excellent coach and a fine leader. And I don't really think that anybody doubts that. But I think people think that maybe things have become a bit stale. As a coach, when you're watching that stuff, you know, in terms of the instructions on the pitch, and you're there week in, week out. Yeah. What's the decision-making process there that doesn't allow for you to go, this isn't working? Is there a... I suppose what I'm asking is there like I'm working with what I have, and this is the best way to play with this group, and there's nothing else to do here. Like, is it that, or what's your...
It's almost... See, with the kicking game, and if you look at it, it's... like a second, like something could go wrong, and it's, you know, so if you're in collisions and you're getting knocked back, you're thinking, okay, that's definitely not working. Whereas with this kicking game, if there was a tiny error, if France touched the ball or if they were out of place, so it's almost like they're sticking with that because obviously they're trying to avoid that contact area. But it's, you know, I've seen other teams do it, but when you're down that much at half time, I thought in that second half in particular, they would have come out with... Why
didn't he?
They obviously felt like they spoke to both wingers maybe and the full back, and they had a conversation, said, look, we need to be up quicker. So they still focused on the same thing, but just thought that the individuals could kick in and be better at that, and that didn't happen. And I suppose the 2 tries were scored and a couple of line breaks after that from playing rugby.
Exactly.
We saw that line break from Gary Ringrose inside our own 22. I'd say that's the first time I've seen Ireland attack from 10 metres out off a set piece and just really go for it and try and get that gain line.
Isn't it really interesting? I mean, we've seen such, across sports, the systemic straitjacket that can sometimes restrict teams. Amarin's tree at the back. He was so wedded to it, even as United faltered. Jim McGuinness in the All-Ireland final last year, where he played that deep-lying zonal defence and allowed Paddy Clifford the freedom at the park to dictate the game. And that's why a lot of the pieces today are talking about that need to innovate, the need to have something off the cuff, the need to change. Rory O'Connor has an interesting piece. He quotes Brendan Fanning's book, Touching Distance, where Eddie Jones references Brazil manager Carlo Ancelotti saying the thing that got you hired is the thing that'll get you fired. And he talks about how Joe Smith brought detail, he brought precision, he brought a hard work ethic, and like everything, it's run its race. And he adds sort of ominously, you look at what he did for Ireland rugby and by the state he left it in. Now Andy comes in and he's a bit freer and he'll end up getting sacked for that, mate. And it's funny because Rory brings up the possibility of perhaps Joe Smith, if he's at a loose end, would it be a time to bring him back in as a consultant, as a coach, to give us the things that we've lost, perhaps, and a wedding of the two ideas, which happened when Andy came in as his assistant in 2016. Shane Horgan talks about having a second playmaker. But there is an understanding, as you said, up to now the talk was, where are we? Now the understanding is we're down there, and how do we begin to climb out of that?
Absolutely. And just another interesting point I thought Rory had as well was, you spoke, Adrian, about how good Andy Farrell is. He's unbelievable. But Rory talks about how he went away on the Lions tour, and it's a chance to get a couple of coaches that are off, that you don't know their philosophies, how they feel about the game, how they coach, different ideas to the game. But he stuck with the predominantly, I know there was obviously we had English coaching, they're predominantly Irish guys he knew. And also you look at the system and who's come up, Sexton, Goodman, they all played the exact same style of rugby. So be it Andy Farrell is unbelievable, but maybe it's time someone comes in with just something a little bit different. Structure is good, but I feel like, yes, everyone's talking about the skill set of the players. I totally understand that, but we've seen how sometimes one coach or one philosophy can actually rejuvenate and just add a bit of life spark into a team that's not performing, and we know they're good players.
There's an interesting argument, Fiona, that's been made quite a bit, and about the Lions, and Rory talks that the Lions became a lap of honour for Irish rugby. I have always been dubious about the notion that a coach just walks away from his team for a year. I know there's huge prestige with the Lions. I know rugby has its financial troubles and the Lions is an ATM. But to me, a team at a pivotal moment of its development, for the head coach just to go for a year and then come back, that, to me, if there are cracks beginning to show in the team, if they're aging, if you need new blood, if you need new ideas, and instead the guy at the top is gone for a year, I think that exacerbates any potential decline. I don't know what you feel as a coach. No,
I totally understand it, and you have to understand where Andy Farrell is coming from as well. And even as rugby players, that's what people say. Obviously, it's coming into the women's game now, but that's the height you can get to. So I think it's obviously unbelievable. But I agree with what you're saying, and even pre-match, a lot of people were talking about, well, the last time we lost to France, Farrell wasn't there, he adds, but it just shows that obviously there's something missing there.
A lot of people say that it doesn't make any difference. We had a fairly fulsome debate yesterday in the studio here. Kevin McLaughlin, Hugh Farrelly and Brendan Fanning were here, and there was a fairly hefty debate about whether it was the right thing or not. But for me, anybody who says that it was fine for him to go, as in it didn't have any impact because he wasn't around, well then, what's the point of a head coach?
That has been my argument. And not speaking after the event, I thought at the time and spoke at the time that I thought the potential damage, the opportunity cost of what is obviously a huge honour for a coach and a huge honour for players, but the opportunity cost was very serious. And we hear all this time about cycles toward the World Cup, and we're at a vital period in terms of the next World Cup, and the story of Irish rugby still can't be written without talking about the fact that we haven't achieved at the same level at the World Cup as we have elsewhere. So I thought it was a very, very dangerous game to play. I mean, we wouldn't allow players represent Ireland when they went and played in England and France. And yet we're facilitating our head coach. And this is not a criticism of Farrell. He's a brilliant, brilliant coach. It's a criticism of the system which facilitates these things.
Yeah, agree with that entirely. Listen, this thing is so multifaceted that there's just so much surmising as to what the hell is wrong with the whole thing, which is, of course, what we're doing right here, right now. Bernard Jackman goes, he says, the fact that our scrum and line-up performed well in Paris and we were still hammered is harrowing, is a line, a piece that definitely struck me after the game. He says, offset piece, we also made some naive decisions that were surprising. The pre-scrum positioning of our defenders for the Jalabert try was crazy. Compared to England and France, our depth is very poor at the moment. I suppose what I'm trying to do with these pieces is to give you a bit of a flavour as to how multifaceted the whole thing is. Shane McGrath says that we've a coaching ticket that looks a season behind the times. Rory Keane says that Farrell's side missed 38 tackles. On and on and on we go. And some of them leave you going, well, we're never going to miss 38 tackles in a game again. Some of them leave you going, our positioning around the Jalabert try wasn't right. We can fix that. But there is stuff like definitely that Bernard Jackman line. The fact that our scrum and line outperformed well in Paris and we were still hammered is harrowing. I think the fix is not easy here.
I really like listening and reading Bernard Jackman because he's one of these people, like, say, Ruby Walsh, when he talks about racing, can distill stuff down to its essence and really give you an insight to what's happening on the ground. And before the game, I was pretty certain Ireland would lose, and I thought it could get ugly. And I thought the main reasons it would get ugly was that the set piece would be under unbelievable pressure, or that the discipline issues of the autumn might continue. The set piece restored itself. The discipline was much better, and yet we were slaughtered. And I think that shows that it's deeply embedded. We talk about, against Italy, do you give the same players another chance? Some people argue that the fact that we lost and that Italy won restricts Farrell's capacity to experiment. I would actually argue it increases the need to be radical. That we have arrived at a point, there's now a trend of players who've grown old together. Magnificent servants to Irish rugby, but a lot of them look like they're past their best. But the issue, and I reference Dublin football again, where there has been a lull period that's become a transition period because great players grew old together and the replacements are good players but not great players. And I think that's a reality facing Irish rugby now, that while we talk about players coming in and making a difference, and take Tommy O'Brien, who's been very exciting for Leinster, and you pitch him into the game on Thursday and you see that different level, that different pace. And we're talking about 3 or 4 young guys who've made impressions at Leinster, Munster and Ulster this year particularly, and about them playing next week.
Yeah.
But again, it's a different level, isn't it, completely?
It is, and we saw it. Now, Tommy Bryan is well capable. Sometimes you can just have a bad game, and I think it stemmed off that aerial battle. But for me, if you're a head coach, right, and you're coming out and you're talking about one of your main points that you're telling the people, the media, everything, is about your discipline. Right? You said it was relatively good. It was. But Joe McCarthy sticking his hands in the middle of in a ruck to give away 3 points. It didn't come down to those 3 points. We were beaten well, essentially. And I know players do it, but this has become a theme. There is guys, it's not that 50-50 battle where you go, okay, it could have gone either way. It's literally stupid penalties.
Does that speak of frustration, do you think, of a player? Joe McCarthy, who's a physical guy who seeks to impose himself on a game, hadn't touched the ball, hadn't done a thing. Is that a coaching issue, or is that an individual being frustrated by his inability to make an impact?
He's frustrated, but I'm just going to throw something out there. He's done that a lot. I don't know how Andy Farrell approaches that, but has there been consequences? So maybe Joe McCarthy isn't involved this week, and I think Joe McCarthy is unbelievable. And it's a brilliant talent. But this has become a theme with some players, and as I said, I don't mind those 50-50s, even if a player gave away 4 penalties and it was 50-50, but it's those simple penalties. Does he have to, as a coach, I suppose, put a marker down and say, we've talked about discipline, this isn't acceptable, you know, we're going to give someone else a shot this time.
Colin Murray spoke about this, Adrian, sorry for cutting in the television coverage, and obviously he's been inside the tent very, very recently, and he was asked, I think Joe Malloy asked him, I can't specifically remember what the issue he was asked about, but he was asked whether a player individually, it could have been Sam Prendergast's defence, and was that addressed? Was he specifically shown, you missed the tackle here and we've got to deal with this? And I was really interested in Connor's response. He said, that's not really the culture in the dressing room. Maybe it needs to be the culture.
Yeah. The point that I'm making is that maybe one of the other players that fits into that thing of silly errors at times is another second row, and suddenly if you remove the two of them from it, what are you left with? James Ryan. Was there a point in the game after 60 minutes when we got a couple of tries and we were back to, was it 15 points? Whatever, was it less than that? Whatever it was at the time. Was there a point there where you thought, maybe?
No, because I felt like France had just gone to sleep. I thought fair play to this bench. I thought Timoney came on, added a bit of grunt. We started to attack. He wasn't at 10, but I actually thought Crowley really tried to get himself involved in a lot of stuff. So I liked what came off the bench, but I just felt like France being France, they were so far ahead. I just knew they were going to come up with a couple more moments of brilliance, and they could have switched it. Us
flatlining basically, and inevitably you take your foot off the pedal a little bit. There was a little bit of joie de vivre about them, and maybe the intensity. France made substitutions. They took off the man of the match after 49 minutes.
That was crazy.
And I mean, he was just.
I was texting mates of mine in the first half, and I was going, "This guy is unbelievable."
It
was incredible, wasn't it?
Gilliard, he's so good.
What Irish players stood out?
That's
Who would you give a 7 out of 10 to? I suppose is that standing out?
Give anyone.
Who would you give a 5 out of 10 to?
5. We'll go with 5. I thought McCluskey done all that he could do. I felt like he didn't miss any tackles in that midfield area. Did he add a bit of pizzazz? Not really, but from a point of view of how he's playing at Ulster and what he can do, I thought he brought that intensity, that similar kind of play. Timoney came on, made a huge impact for me. A lot of people probably won't agree, but not great at times, but in that maul defence area, I thought Cian Prendergast was outstanding. He got himself in 3 times in the mix for, like, the French maul is hard to stop. I think he got 1 turnover, twice they had to use it because he'd swam through and got himself. So I felt like there was a couple of players in a certain area of the game, they were outstanding, but like overall performances, there was no one that was unbelievable. And
no 7 out of 10s.
I really rack my brain to think the back row not up to much. They were outclassed the second row. There was too many errors. I think you probably have to take your hat off to Thomas Clarkson.
Yeah,
you have to say. And obviously Lockman, he had a couple of knock-ons during the game, but I personally said it. I said there is no way everyone is going crazy about this scrum. There's no way they're going to get obliterated. I knew that if you watch Irish scrums and people, big, huge teams, they focus on Porter a lot of the time. The penalties are, the referees are showing angles, doing this, they're in the referee's brain. And with this, Dixon in particular, he likes the flow of the game. So I knew if they could lock out that scrum that we'd be okay. The lineup went really well, but overall performances, no one put in an absolutely amazing overall performance. I think
if you're looking for those green shoots, rather than your 7 out of 10s, you can say the set piece actually held up. But I think when Rory O'Connor in his piece quotes Brian O'Driscoll in the TV coverage saying, what concerns me is that there's now a vulnerability to this team. Other sides will be thinking it's nothing like the Irish team of 2 years ago. We're not talking about 10 years ago or 12 years ago. That sort of decline has been swift and precipitous, and that's why you're worrying when you're looking for those green shoots of optimism. ordinarily, if you lost a match like that, you'd still say, yeah, there were 3 7 out of 10s. When no one is performing to a level, is it a sign that the playing talent is in trouble? Is it a sign that the coaching message to the players is not getting through? Is it a sign that systemically we've been, as Shane McGrath says, that we've been left behind by a changing game? So I think there are deeper questions about why there aren't 7 out of 10s.
And can I add into that, by the way, Rory O'Connor's line here about after the game that Andy Farrell spoke about his team's lack of intent and fight, admitting his description of the performance was something that I never thought we'd be saying about the Irish team. That's an incredible bit, because that's the bit that needs no coaching and no explanation in terms of having it. So, I don't know. Listen, we should be worried, of course, but I'm always looking for those little bit of what are the optimistic bits, but I'll go the opposite direction, because Rory Keane says that we should be very concerned that Italy, he's suggesting that there could be a first ever Six Nations win for Italy in Dublin. What do you think?
Look, I'll be honest, I was speaking about people and they're all like, I don't think so. I think there is enough credit in the bank with these players to understand that they haven't been performing. I think we'll see I don't think we'll see as much kicking. Italy were outstanding watching them against Scotland, and even that defensive effort at the end. I mean, that's Italy in general would implode in those situations. They'd give away a penalty. So they are a very, very well coached side, and they are so good in attack. The centres in particular just work so well against each other. But I feel like this team have enough credit, Andy Farrell, that they will go back to the drawing board and they will.
There wasn't a pile in it last year.
There wasn't, but
or against Wales.
I know. I feel like they will still win the 3 home games.
I think the Italian performance yesterday was very important for the Six Nations.
Yeah. Because
with Wales down and out, I mean, that game in Rome yesterday, they may as well have played it in the Trevi Fountain. It was that bloody wet. But some of the ball handling and attack from the Italians was so stunning. Good. As you say, those 2 centres. And with thanks to, I think, I can't recall from who. Will Slattery actually had the tweet this morning about Italy had won 1 of 42 games before Gonzalo Casada took over, and they've won 4 and 11 since. So good. And they have turned the corner, and they'll come with incredible confidence here. It's actually a really, really interesting game now, which you wouldn't, at the start.
They're the tickets you can get hold of normally, aren't they?
and Ireland in peak momentum, you'd almost be saying, sure, the kids can go to the Italian game. Now it's an existential moment for both teams. I mean, I'm like you. I text a friend of mine, a very experienced journalist, during the Italian game yesterday, saying this Italy team will beat us. And he said, no, they won't, because of Thursday. And I kind of get that, but I also wonder, is that us imagining an Ireland that maybe no longer exists? Or are we in our doomsday sort of outlook here, overreacting to what happened? I don't think so, because the pattern of demise has been impossible to ignore. But Andy Farrell and a lot of those senior players who have huge credit in the bank over the years still require a big, big performance. There's a lot of players, this could be a last hurrah for.
Part of the difficulty with beating Italy and even beating them well is that
Twickenham
it's not France and Twickenham, but that it's not like, when you look over the last year and a bit, South Africa, New Zealand, England, France, like they are the teams that we need to be beating. Like even if we beat Italy, it'll be seen as a bit of a sticking plaster. Listen, England are coming hot in the heels, and if we were to beat them, then that'd be great, obviously, and things would be absolutely back on track again. But
well, if you look at what England did yesterday, and but for a refereeing decision in the end, they would have put 50 on Wales. If you look what England A did on Friday night to Ireland,
what was the spread for that game? Because
it was 30.
30.
Okay.
What did it end up as?
42, 43 was it?
Yeah, 40.
So that was the spread, and Italy were +8, so they completely turned the spread around. But if you were just using the empirical evidence available to you from the last 3 days, Twickenham could be grim.
Yeah. Well, that's it, and even I think Andy Farrell being down in Thomond Park as well for that Ireland A game. I know they're young guys thrown together, but part of me is like, you're not going to have changes across the board, but is this Italian game a chance? We know he loves detail. We know how even Rory Connor spoke about, I think it was Rory was saying how maybe Jack Crowley doesn't fit into what he loves. Sam, even Connor coming on Virgin Media and talking about, Sam Prendergast asked questions in the meeting room.
Yeah.
There's some people don't ask.
Is that what you mean? This is a good thing. Is what you're saying.
Coaches love that, blah, 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 and the detail, and he'd have his notebook out and there's great detail. Maybe now it's a chance to get a couple, I'm not saying it's wrong, but getting a couple of athletes out there, and maybe they don't know the detail, but by God, they'll get you over the gain line and carry the ball.
Spontaneous talent. We live in an age of coaching structure, and sometimes coaches' obsession with structure can actually hinder individual talent. And that piece
100%.
Rory talks about, where he talks about Jack Crowley, who is this once-off talent, somebody who can turn a game with a moment of brilliance, but that there might be a suspicion that he doesn't join those coaching dots, that he freestyles. But the great artists don't join the dots. They use their imagination to paint brushstrokes of genius. So maybe we do have to step away from an absolutist template that reduces the capacity of an individual to do what the individuals of France did within a structure, but still to encourage individuality rather than look upon it with suspicion.
I think you're making a case for Sam Prendergast there. Yeah. That's my conclusion.
I'm making a case for Jack Crowley.
I know you are, but what I'm saying
I
is
understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think what Fiona was saying, that Farrell likes Prendergast, number one, because he knows how high the ceiling is, but also because he is wedded to Farrell's vision of the game.
Yeah.
Whereas perhaps as players need to be challenged, as we all need to be challenged in life, perhaps coaches need to be challenged as well about their template. And I go back, and there is no comparison to what Ireland have achieved and Amarim's absolute implosion at United. But an obsession with one approach can be restrictive and can hinder development. It's all fine when things are going well. But in this situation where we're in a hole, perhaps we need to look at the way we're playing and say, is this getting the optimum from the players at our disposal?
And sometimes we coach, and I've seen this in Ireland, sometimes we coach and take out, we're told, the individuality out of players. You're like, you can't do that, you should kick here, you should do that. So that, blasé that we see in French, that I'll do what I want and it pays off. We actually in Ireland, and I know this from being in the system, sometimes don't allow that, and I've seen it in a lot of players. You're questioning, why did you do that? Why did you kick there? Our structure is we go 2 phases and we do this, and I understand you need that in the game, but now we're getting to the stage where those grey areas, as Rory said, our players haven't made enough decisions or haven't had enough skill set to try make errors, that they don't know what to do when this isn't working.
That shadow of Johnny Sexton, we think it should be easing into the background again. But that line I quoted earlier from Rory, I think, is a really interesting one, where he says, Ireland are dedicated to a system built around a player they can't replace, and no one is strong enough to suggest going another way. I mean, that in the piece, Rory talks about Farrell's incredible CV and is in no way suggesting that he's not an outstanding coach. And that's certainly not my intent either. But when you become system reliant to a point that it's restricting the capacity of potential game changers, I think when you have just suffered the kind of defeat that we have in Paris, when you've suffered the kind of autumn that we have, you have to say, do we need to give more freedom to individuals who they may not, but who may be able to change things?
Can I ask, and we have other things to get to, sit tight, audience, we will get to them in a second, but just on that, since you bring it up in relation to Sexton, because it just struck me as you were chatting there, Rory does make, I think it's in Rory's piece where he makes a lot of the points about the way Andy Farrell came into the system under Joe Schmidt as an outsider and somebody who might offer a bit different, and Rory's making the point that actually there's a lot of coaches from within the system that have come into the game. But Johnny Sexton, everything, if anything we think to know about Johnny Sexton is true, is that he is not going with the flow. Like, he is not going to sit there and go, we've done it, we've always done it this way, so that's the way we should do it. Like, surely he is a person who's going to challenge every iota of the plan and the detail.
Yeah, but he's brought up in a system where the system works. So everything he's played in that system. He's like, this is the best system because he is unbelievable and he has the ability to put like so many players and there's so many options.
But he himself knows.
Yeah.
That none of the options are as good as him.
Yeah, but he backs whatever.
Because otherwise we're saying
coaching
he's Roy
system.
Keane. Do you know what I mean? In his coaching mantras, as in, why aren't you me? Why aren't you me? Effectively.
No, but what I'm trying to say is his belief in the system. He's like, okay, these players need to be better, is what I think. I don't think he would come in with.
The system is okay, but the players.
Yes.
Okay.
And yes, I agree at times. I mean, when Johnny was playing, but I do believe teams are also reading us defensively.
Yeah.
But it's also because I could tell you, Roy could tell you, the ball's going to go there. The ball's going to go behind the back. Obviously, the body language around the pass, and Johnny had an ability to, and the players around him just perform differently with him. So I don't think Johnny would come in and have anything different. Whereas, just for an example, if I were the RFU, I would be getting every bit of money I could get together, and I know he's just signed a contract, and getting Noel Mack. I mean, we saw Noel Mack with the 20s, right? They didn't give him a job in Leinster, so he went over to Bordeaux. Watch Bordeaux's attack. They're unbelievable. But he's also learned from other coaches over there. And someone like him involved in the system would be unbelievable. And even Richie Murphy came in after. But I remember, and you could say it's the personnel, but I remember watching 2 years of Noel Mack's 20s, and I was like, these guys are throwing it around. They love it. They weren't huge, physically huge, but they were able to beat France, able to beat England, because there was just an attack and a freedom in what they were doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes a voice just becomes jaded. No matter how much success there has been, no matter how players have been inspired by a coaching ticket, they have a finite shelf life. And in an age where you're being fed so much information, in an age of innovation around other countries, perhaps you just need a disruptor. You need to freshen it up. You need to sprinkle it with a bit of sugar, something that will bring change. And that is the thing you started out with, Adrian, that there's a consensus that we need something to happen. It's just finding what that something is now.
Well, I thought we were going to do a bit of that over the last 45 minutes, and I'm not sure we've done any of it.
We're back at the start.
But I did enjoy the conversation, and I found it to be a little bit cathartic, if nothing else. So there we go. We will move on. I know you, Tommy Conlon's piece as well, Roy, will push people in the direction that I know you were taken by that.
Yeah,
too,
it was very lyrical writing from Tommy, which I greatly enjoyed.
We'll move on to the one of the main soccer stories of the day. It's in the Sunday Times. It's written by Paul Rowan, who himself is at the centre of this story, and the headline: "The truth about why McLean will no longer speak to me." He says, "It's disappointing to hear Winger call me a grass of my reporting of a big story in 2017, especially after I repeatedly stuck up for him during his time in England." And that sort of really does sum up the piece. The short story of the backstory here, we were discussing it in last week's papers, was that after the President's Cup, James McLean came out to the mix zone with the press afterwards and said he wouldn't speak to the media while a certain journalist was there. Paul Rowan didn't mention who that was, but James McLean did afterwards quickly take to Instagram to say it was Paul Rowan, and as Paul himself says, he called him a grass, among other things, which of course, coming from Derry, has an extra layer to it as well. And so that's where that was left, and it was all about a game, Ireland-Austria in 2017. We drew 1-1, and there was, some interviews afterwards where James McLean and Martin O'Neill were saying things like, James McLean say, "You watch the game, you tell me they're the 12th man today," and Paul makes the point that this was picked up on by a lot of media outlets afterwards, including RTE, with a tweet of the video interview with Tony O'Donoghue, and the Irish Independent tweeting it out that this was in the ether. This wasn't, he's painting the picture, this wasn't me going to FIFA to say these guys need to be banned, but he was asking the question, as journalists often do. So that's the backstory to it. And then today, Paul says, he called me a grass and issued a loud expletive. This is about the press room last weekend. a loud, expletive-filled ultimatum. Either I leave the room or he would answer questions outside as long as I wasn't there. My colleagues refused to budge. And McLean turned on his heels and walked off, followed by Tiernan Lynch, his manager, who was asked to stay and talk but refused, saying something like, "We win together and we lose together," which is a small bit of a head-scratcher in the whole thing, but there we go. That's what happened last weekend. Paul does go on to say, that he says McLean won't be aware of how I frequently over the years, this reporter went out of his way, which was the phrase that McLean had used, to the English FA in London with questions about whether clubs would be sanctioned for their supporters' sectarian abuse of McLean for not wearing the poppy. And he closes it out with, "Can I take credit for McLean subsequently being given dispensation by the EFL to leave the field by the shortest possible route when being substituted to avoid him getting abuse from opposition fans? Probably not, nor should I take the blame for McLean's wee spot of bother back in 2017. That one is on him."
I think we are in an age where coaches and players obsess about control. You have in-house media channels which are basically powder puff in the stuff that they put out. There is intense media training of a lot of people to encourage them to speak a lot but say very little. And when you get a situation like this, McLean has always traded on this notion of being a straight shooter. He has never been afraid to be outspoken, and the Poppy story and his pride in Derry, all of the above. I've made some incredible friendships in sport. I've had some incredible falling outs. I recall a time where you could go into an All-Ireland final dressing room, to winning and losing dressing room, 5 minutes after the match, when people are either in a moment of absolute euphoria or struggling with a deep grief, and you sit beside the people and they'd spill out to you, and you got incredible revelation and built a sense of trust because you were getting the real picture. Not so long ago, an inter-county manager called me. I had written what I thought was a really positive piece about that team, and he was very unhappy about it because I had used quotes which were all verbatim and taped quotes, but he thought he was speaking in a situation, even though it was a public situation, where those quotes shouldn't have been used. We agreed to disagree, and we had a fine conversation afterwards. So there is this tension, and at their best, there should be a tension of some type between what media are writing and what sports teams want to get out. The same as in politics. That's just a reality. I think what's plain, if you read Paul's piece here, is that, in my view, James has completely overreacted. There was a similar situation after the 2012 All-Ireland, where Jim McGuinness refused to do... He has just achieved his lifelong dream of winning an All-Ireland, and yet he refused to do the post-match press conference until the journalist Declan Bogue left the room. Declan Bogue had written a book about Ulster football, and one of the people who he used was Kevin Cassidy, who McGuinness then evicted from the Derry squad, the Donegal squad, even though he was one of their more important players, because it was about control. And I think, shamefully at the time, I wasn't there, but the journalists agreed to Declan Bogue being removed, even though Declan Bogue had done nothing wrong and was doing his job, and McGuinness conducted the interview. Here, I was encouraged by the fact that the journalist declined to have Paul removed, because it's a journalist's job to ask questions. It's a journalist's job to try and get to the truth of a story. Do we make mistakes? Of course we do. Are we wrong sometimes? Absolutely. But if I look at the bones of that story, and James and Martin O'Neill might be unhappy with what happened back in 2017, but did Paul professionally do anything wrong? Not at all.
I think that Declan Bogue, Jim McGuinness situation is almost a seminal moment that results in something like what happened at the Aviva last weekend, that it's actually in the consciousness of journalists that we actually know where we stand in this now, and we've given a bit of thought.
Yeah, I think there was another case on a Lions tour, my pal Dave Kelly from the Indo at the time, and again there was a tension, and the journalists...
Was that in Ireland?
Was it Ireland?
Might have been, yeah. You could be right.
Yeah, and the journalists again decided, no, we won't sacrifice just to play the game. And sometimes we are a bit hesitant to fight our own case, I think. And I am straying miles off subject here, and there is no comparison. But if you see what's happening with White House politics, and if you see that basically they are surrounding themselves with yes men, they are evicting people who are asking important questions about the future of democracy, about whether America has fallen into authoritarianism. I'm not making a like-for-like comparison. I'm just talking about the importance of journalists being in the room to ask important questions.
Yeah, it strikes me that, like, if James McLean had picked up the phone, or the two of them could have had a chat 10 years ago, that this would have actually, because he's under the impression that, you know, Paul very eloquently lays out the case that this wasn't me going to FIFA and they didn't know about it at that point. This thing was out in the ether, and obviously McLean is like, you're an Irish person shopping me in, and you know, and there's a nuance to that as you say, as a journalist, isn't that his job? You said at the start that you had many a fallen out or a disagreement. Anything along these lines that you're happy to share with us, using names and details and dates?
Yeah, well, Steve Staunton and myself would have been friendly during his playing days. He would often come over on away trips and talk away and give you a little bit of insight, and it was really, really good. And I remember one time he called me on the eve of an All-Ireland final. I think one of his parents had a Mayo connection, and he was looking for a ticket, and I managed to get a ticket when there were no tickets going, and was delighted to help. We socialised at the end of his playing days. We would have went out for beers together. And then after the loss to Cyprus, I asked the first question in the press conference. That was a time he stood aside, and I wrote a couple of pieces and probably went over the top in some of the imagery I used in writing about him, and it led to a fairly volcanic falling out, and I regret those things. I would have been very friendly with Brian Kerr. I admire Brian Kerr almost more.
Why was it volcanic, can I ask?
Well, he was very, 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 very unhappy.
And publicly in the press conferences, or
no, it was more privately.
Okay.
And to be honest, I had no qualms about asking the questions I asked. I probably, in hindsight, would have written things differently in the way I did. I'm going to say, and I was younger and I was more naive. I wasn't that young by any means, but I would do it much differently now. Brian Kerr, I was very close to. When they won the under-18s in Cyprus, we were over there and we went out together every night. I championed his advance to the Irish job, and he actually rang me up and thanked me for it. I think I was on the old Setanta on the night he lost his job, and which was obviously a hugely emotional and difficult moment for him. And I felt it probably needed to happen and express that. And Brian and myself basically haven't spoken since. 2 or 3 times I've been in his company and attempted to resolve the issue, because genuinely there is nobody in sport, in global sport, I more admire than Brian Kerr. But it was almost like my need to do the job fractured what had been a friendship. And that one I really, really regret, because I don't know if I could have done anything different while being true to myself. But I love the guy. I love listening to him. I love what he's done for Irish football. I'd love to see him back involved with Irish football. And yet that chasm is open. That just doesn't seem to be. I was actually doing a tribute to Con Houlihan, and Brian was in the room with somebody I was doing the tribute with, and I thought, should I go over and have a chat now? And I don't want to force the issue too much, but it is, you know, as you get older and as you look back on things and you realise the things that matter in life, you know, friendships and the joy Brian Kerr gave to the country and the joy he gave to me, and I regret it deeply. I actually get emotional thinking about it, in the way that I can no longer ring him. I could no longer feel comfortable walking up to him. I could no longer have a drink with him. And yeah, that makes me sad.
Aren't you also describing the essence of journalism?
Yeah,
Roy?
yeah, and I also
Not being
know
afraid to fall out with.
at times my friendship with people has definitely compromised me. On the other hand, I mean, over the last 15, 20, 25 years, I would have very, very close friendships within all those Dublin dressing rooms, closer than anybody else in journalism would have. I knew stuff that would have been revelatory, but I knew it because of a friendship outside of journalism, and as a consequence, there was no way I would betray those trusts. So I was actually compromising myself through friendship, but the friendships were more important to me in that case when the friendship preceded the journalism, if you know what I mean.
do. Difficult. It's no straight line, but I think in terms of modern journalism, I feel I would rather people were more on your side of the fence, in the sense of, like, you don't set out to intentionally burn a relationship, but you have to be true to what you believe, because otherwise, as a journalist, what are you? It's the only currency you have.
Well, there are certainly times in my career I did things that I regretted, and I didn't carry myself in the best fashion. But now, certainly in recent years, I try to put myself into the seat that other person is sitting in. And management can be a very, very lonely job. Being an elite player, you're isolated. You can be hugely rewarded in some sports, or you have a huge profile in others. But there is a depth of loneliness and a depth of vulnerability that we see when people talk about being in the arena and being judged and having brainless social media commentary that can destroy a person, that can put them in a really difficult place. And I think you have to be conscious of that evolving world. You have to be conscious of how alone, particularly in the darker days, an elite athlete is. I was talking recently to Kevin McManaman, the Dublin footballer, who does some sports psych work now, and he was doing some work with rugby referees.
Oh, yeah.
And he told me some horror stories that I won't share, individual stories, but about how some of those referees were stepping away from the sport because they had endured stuff that was subhuman almost. So, you know, you can get on your high horse about being a journalist, and a lot of the stuff I write now is more sitting down with people and that getting inside their mind, and you're being empathetic rather than confrontational. But there are times when those confrontations occur, and I think humanity is far more important than a headline that'll be forgotten tomorrow.
Yeah. That was a lesson for, I think, any journalist students coming through. There's a lot in that it's it can be a difficult road to walk at times. We'll all have to remember this when Fiona's involved in the Irish coaching thing.
You'd be waiting, I'd say now.
Hayes must go.
Hayes can't get in.
With a sub-headline of difficult. This is a difficult thing to write. Right, Dan McDonald, by the way, is a good piece in the Sunday Independent as well. Just it's more the wider lens about James McLean's worth a read. Won't take much for Derry to explode if McLean era ignites. It's all about playing in a new position, and some quotes. I think these are from Tiernan Lynch's manager. There's no ego with him in there. He does what everybody else does, but I've no doubt that as the season goes on, he'll play a bigger part in that dressing room. And I think for all of us looking in, it's kind of replaced the Damien Duff factor in a lot of ways, and we'll see how it plays out. Is this the end of his spat with Paul Rowan? Who knows? We'll continue with the soccer theme, and we'll go to, there's a couple of pieces on this today, but Tom Allnut in the Sunday Times today, from Catalan independence to Gaza, inside the mind of political Pep. The range of issues Guardiola speaks out on has widened in recent years, but as far back as the 1992 Olympics, he was vocal on the subjects that he cared about. So it's really that wide picture of who Pep Guardiola really is, his upbringing, Catalan to the core. Dad hoping that one day he'd manage a Catalan national team. His sister has held senior positions in Catalan government, and he's very politically interested, and over the last week has not been sort of afraid to show that he was obviously out in his home city in support of the people of Gaza and the onslaught that they're on the end of from Israel. And that's obviously not a straightforward thing to do in any way, shape or form, given the position that he has and the profile, I suppose, that he has. But I just thought this was a really interesting piece around the backstory of him. There's including a piece that I was totally unaware of, that after he finished playing in 2006, he briefly tried his hand as a political journalist. What the hell? Conducting a series of little-known interviews with Spain's centre-left Prime Minister of the time, Zapatero. It was supposed to air in 2007, but the footage has never been seen. He got a job as the Barcelona B coach. Zapatero's star was on the way, and I think it'll probably never see the light of day. But I think for anybody who's curious as to what's going on with Pep Guardiola, why would he, attend a rally like that, wearing the famous Palestine scarf as well around his neck? These pieces are really good for that sort of insight around what drives a decision like that.
Yeah, and just even on that, I think he's so established now as a manager that he can do that. Like, it's not going to, like, people speak about politics should never cross with sport, but I think with Pep, his personality is I love him anyway. I enjoy listening to him, but I think he's so established now as a coach that he could probably speak about anything, and I don't think it in the future would ever interfere with him getting a job in soccer. Whereas someone young and up and coming,
you'd say if he wasn't at Manchester City, you'd say, well, the one place he'll never get a job is Man City.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
I think in the volatile age we live in, it's actually very important that influential sports people do become involved in politics. I think someone like the Golden State Warriors coach Steve Kerr has been one of those bulwarks against the onslaught of authoritarianism in America. I think with Pep, part of his genius as a coach and part of his brilliance as a coach is that he has a curious mind, is that he's interested in stuff outside of his immediate remit. He has learned so much from, he admits himself, from NBA, from talking to golfers, from reading about people's struggles in life. And I think that tallies with what you're seeing now. A rounded individual, not a one-track mind, not one-dimensional. And I think if you want to be a man manager, if you want to be an innovative tactician, to learn by osmosis from life's experiences, I think is very important. It also does ask the question, is he now speaking with that freedom because he's on the verge of stepping away from Manchester City? And
well, he scoffs at that every time it comes up.
He does.
He does a lot of things that look like as if he's on the way out.
Yeah.
But anytime he gets asked about it, he bristles.
He does, but I don't think that necessarily means he's not going to go, because a coach becomes a lame duck the moment it's known that he is on the way out. And there is also one, Rory Smith also has a piece in the Sunday, though it's a Guardian Observer piece, in which he does mention one interesting counterpoint to this, is that given Guardiola is effectively a high-profile soft power advocate for Abu Dhabi, accused along with the rest of the UAE of being complicit in the genocide in Sudan, it seems fair to suggest that his moral position is more complex than he is prepared to admit in public. The sincerity of his views, though, should not be in doubt. And I think, didn't he make a huge donation, £1 million or something, during COVID to the health authorities in Barcelona who treated his mother who died, I think, during COVID. Okay. So he is a person clearly of conscience, and I think it's refreshing when you see people, once they've armed themselves with sufficient knowledge, who step outside the narrow parameters of their sport.
Yeah, and isn't it us all, in the sense that, like, there isn't a, he's probably conflicted to be at the club that he's at, but yet holds these views and isn't afraid to express them. And listen, the tricky thing about this is that, like, I suppose when he comes out and does something like that, or the manager of your team comes out and does something that you don't agree with, then that's where you're, maybe the trickiness comes in. At least for me, that day is not today in terms of Pep, but there we go. We'll move on to some of the GAA stuff. I know you wanted to draw attention, Roy, to some of the writing from the game of Páirc Uí Chaoimh last night. Nearly 31,000 at the game. I had a few mates that were at it. They were absolutely raving about the atmosphere, and like this, to all intents and purposes, was no league game. Cork win out by 7 points in the end. Tip got it back to 3 as it ticked into added time, but it wasn't to be. Last year was not to be. It struck me, and like, away you go with this, Roy, wherever you want, but winning the game was not important. really, other than if Cork, it was more important that Cork didn't lose the game in the sense of the deepening of the wound from last year.
Yeah, Mick Foley talks about that today in the Sunday Times. To me, the Cork hurlers are the most interesting case study in sport at the moment. When a team has been building towards something momentous, when that sport, more than any other sport, dictates the mood of a people, gets closer to the soul of a people, as hurling does in Cork, when you have an A-list county which has gone 21 years now without winning in All-Ireland, when you have that extraordinary second half meltdown and all the nonsensical rumour and innuendo that followed it, the psychological place that team is in, I cannot conceive how lonely life was for those Cork players in the days and weeks after last July. I mean, 6 points up at half-time. It's a coronation you're expecting in the second half. They've scored a goal just before the break. Then they come out and score 2 points in the second half. It was a systemic meltdown. It was, you've almost finished your novel and it all disappears off the hard drive. It was just catastrophic and unimaginable, and inevitably there's the social media commentary. And these are not professional athletes. These are going back into their community. They're going back into jobs. They're going back into college. And all the questions that arise around their mental capacity to get over the line, because it's no doubting their ability. Pat Ryan is a guy I really like, a really genuine, decent sort of guy. He had a very interesting piece with Dennis Walsh in the Irish Times yesterday, where he talked about he'd only had 2 nights of full through the night sleep in the last year, realised he had to step away for his own health after the most difficult year of his life. Stuff happened in his family life as well. I think the absolute right guy has come in. Ben O'Connor, I mean, we don't reference any Cork leader without talking Roy Keane and Ronan O'Gara, and I think there's a bit of both in Ben O'Connor. He's tough, uncompromising. He was a brilliant player. He has curious mind. He has talked out about the physical side of the game, and I know sometimes people get self-righteous and on the high moral ground saying we've got to clean and cleanse the game. I think part of hurling is this elemental, visceral nature to it, and he's championing that. And I think it's really interesting because the perception outside is that the reason Cork might have had their meltdown was a mental softness. Yeah. And O'Connor is mentally as hard as it gets.
I was even watching the interviews after the game yesterday, on every single channel. I was eating them up wherever I could get them, but it was... Christ, I could see how players would want to... and I'm not saying they weren't doing that, obviously, last year, but...
Well, I'm a dub, but I grew up spending a lot of time in Cork, and I'd say Cork hurling are one of my favourite teams, and I was really, really excited going to the All-Irelands, and I found it inexplicable, and then really wanted to study the individuals and how they must feel when we talk about the humanity and the empathy, because however much supporters might be disappointed, when players themselves, they had this demolition of Dublin in the semi-final. They'd won their first league, their first Munster, but they'd also, in their first championship game in Munster, blown a 10-point lead against Clare. They'd been blown out by Limerick. So there had been a pattern of implosion when things went wrong. And Fiona, you know, as a coach, that when you have a team that's full of ability, but there is that line that when things go wrong, they seem unable to cross. They don't know where to go.
Yeah, and you definitely, I remember that. And I've been living in Cork. I moved to Dublin, but they love hurling down there.
It's right on. It's number one, isn't it?
It is unbelievable. I worked up in the Glen in Cork, and they obviously soccer, Roy Keane territory as well beside Mayfield, but the hurling, and there was almost like an air around the place of just utter sadness. I'm a Limerick woman. I own a house in Cork now, but it was just unbelievable because they couldn't understand. And there was no, they couldn't say, we were better or we were robbed. It was just sheer implodingness. And the thing about it is, you're talking about Roy as well, you know, if you're in a high-performing team or a high-performance environment, you probably get to go away and hide with your team, or you get to do something. These lads in the next couple of days, a lot of them have to go back to work, and people coming into your office are asking you what could go wrong. And I just think Ben O'Connor is unbelievable. To hear him coming out, I really enjoyed it. And you know, it's strange if I'm ever away, and I don't know if people feel the same, but if I'm out of the country and people talk about hurling from a different country and how crazy it is, how mad it is, I always have a little sign of pride. I'm so delighted.
Exactly.
They're like, you're mad over there.
Fiona,
I was in a pub in January, and there were a gang of people who came in. They'd been at the Guinness store, and it was very evident they were tourists and looking for. They were asking. I think there was a Leinster rugby match on that evening, and should they go? And is rugby or soccer the biggest sports here? And I was telling them about Gaelic football and hurling, and I showed them clips of Kevin McMenamin's goal in the 2011 All-Ireland, and then I showed them there's a compilation of Henry Shefflin's greatest moments and Tony Kelly's goals. These were French lads. Honestly, they were just blown away. And I think we send our biggest tourist attraction is the Guinness Storehouse. It gets more than 1 million people every year, and people come over here, and that's a must-do thing, because that's something uniquely Irish when you're looking for a point of difference in an increasingly globalised world. And I keep thinking the opportunity to have some tourism around hurling. I mean, it is such an asset that we have. I get that same surge of pride. And
the videos of Sky Sports showing
Chris
the clips
Kamara and all of this
so
and the reaction
brilliant.
to it, and maybe that speaks of our own insecurity.
But we
I
love
don't
the
know.
physicality as well, so
Totally.
agreeing with him, I love that.
I'm just imagining the French fans going home and going, Irish people are so knowledgeable about the sport, and they can just tell you like from the full history of it, but little did they realise who they actually.
And it's funny, as a lifelong Dublin fan, and it's well known, I grew up on that. If you ask me one thing I would like to happen in sport this year, I would nearly say in second place I'd love Shane Lowry to win the Masters, but nothing would mean as much to this Dubliner as Cork winning the All-Ireland hurling title.
Jeez. I give you a couple of seconds to think about whether you want to go to Colm O'Rourke on us being a nation of whingers, Shane McGrath on Cranky Bonnish Stores, or Paul Kimmage, Hold the Back Page. So you can chat amongst yourselves for a second there and pick one of those, because we've only got about 8 minutes to go or less. And a reminder, by the way, in the meantime, that Sunday Paper Review and Off the Ball is in partnership with Centra. Make sure your fridge is match ready to kick off with a cold one. Over 18s only. Drink responsibly. Get the facts and visit drinkaware.ie. What have the panel landed on?
I'm happy to go with Roy. He's far more knowledgeable than me, as long as it's not the Kimmage.
I doubt that, but jumping from the Kimmage to the Shane McGrath piece, quickly on Shane McGrath, when he talks about the importance of having the Cranky Bonnish Store and the words Kieran McGeeney, Ben O'Connor in recent weeks, Jack O'Connor, and speaking out and speaking their mind, and in a sort of an age that can be a little bit plastic in what you hear, you're getting unfiltered stuff, which I think is magnificent. Then the Paul Kimmage piece, which we spoke about this morning, Adrian, starts off really, really well. I think it is, in essence, a piece about getting old, about mortality. Paul is 62. I think he's 4 or 5 years older than me, but I've been nearly 40 years involved in journalism. And Paul references talking to someone about Saipan, and they almost were, they hadn't been born at the time of Saipan. I was in Saipan. I was at Euro 88 when I was 19 years of age. And he talks about people not knowing who Jimmy Connors was. And I think this is a story about sports journalism, but a story about life. And when I was talking about falling out with people earlier, it's a similar sort of thing. I spend a huge amount of my life thinking about death now. I'm not old in the truest sense. I'm not unhealthy, thank God. But at 57, you start asking yourself bigger questions that can be reflected very quickly when you talk to people, younger people, and keynote moments in your life that you feel like happened yesterday or the day before. They weren't born. They don't know about them. And you increasingly can feel slightly like a dinosaur. And when you find the first of the group of friends I grew up with is 60 this year, and I think Paul is touching at this, and we were going to go away to Cheltenham. We're all big horse racing fans. But we decided we're too bloody old logistically to go to Cheltenham with the big crowds. So we're going to Dingle for Cheltenham. And I finished this week the incredible book Mayflies by Andrew O'Donnell, the Scottish writer. He just writes some incredible stuff, and it's a meditation on life, on friendship, on premature death. And I thought Paul started this piece. It's worth reading the start, because I think he's talking about those things, and they do become, as you become a bit older, and if you're a reflective type of person, if you self-obsess like I often do, if you have spent your life fighting an imposter syndrome, growing old, seeing people around you sort of fail, seeing the great moments of your life disappear in the rearview mirror. I know this is very existential for a Sunday afternoon programme about sport, but I think it is an issue that sort of dogs a lot of people as they get a little older.
Yeah, and just even reading it, I suppose I'm mad into theming as a coach. I'd always have something. So when I moved up to Belleville this year, I'd have to spend a bit of time with the team, because I don't want to just pick something random, and it'll always be crazy kind of. So I was looking at Shakira, because there's a connection to Wolves and different things with the songs, and hips stay in square, hips don't lie, stuff around that. And I put this big mad presentation together, I was delighted with myself, and I was like, yeah, she's modern enough singer. Half of them didn't even know who Shakira was.
It's frightening, isn't it?
I was like, we went with it, and it kind of became something that we'd look into. But I was thinking, I won't go Spice Girls now, they're too old or whatever. I was thinking Shakira is modern day, but look, and you're having, I think at 50, whatever, I'm 42, and I'm thinking about that as well. I think it's the coaching lifestyle. I think it is, it's aged me.
Yeah.
I'm somewhere in the middle of the two and I'm on the same buzz.
Wearing it beautifully, Adrian.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Roy. Compliments to get you everywhere. I have to say, I did think a small picture is as vivid as ever. Paul's Hold the Back Page piece. I was delighted to pick it up. I was delighted to see a picture of him on a bike on the back of it. And as I said, I was delighted to read the first bits, because I thought, I actually feel, needless to say, reading a lot of the Sunday papers with a slightly different view maybe over the last couple of years as well in relation to this lot. Like, I take an awful lot more of this type of stuff from Paul Kimmage, given how he views the world, given his experience as a writer and not, of course, at the coalface of sport as well. It didn't materialise like that as the piece went on. It was a slightly different bit, but I definitely take more reflective opinion, whatever you want to describe it. Like, he's done obviously a lot of work, important work around the rowing as well over the last few months, and it's not really a comment on any of that, but just to say I was delighted to see this, and I thought, this is what I'm after.
I think there are so many people who could write those type of pieces, and they would be really interesting. We've been fortunate with counselling of young sportsmen to hear younger sportsmen being very open about issues like addiction and depression. And I think older sports people, you hear a lot of sports people when they leave the arena talking about the vacuum it leaves in their life and the psychological difficulties. But sports writers who are lucky to have had a ringside seat, and you see the changing world of media, and you see how AI can invade upon what was your bailiwick, and you do feel increasingly vulnerable. I left a job I'd been in for nearly a quarter of a century a couple of years ago in a situation that wasn't of my choosing, and it left me struggling really emotionally. I was depressed. There was no doubt about that. I got into a very dark place. Writing is vocational for me, and I felt like I'd lost a limb. I felt like a vital part of me, the way I measured myself, had been stripped away. And it took me to the darkest place I've been in my life. So I thankfully came out the other side. But aging and the life raft of the job by which you measure yourself being taken from you can leave you trashing about in a very deep ocean and in danger sometimes of going under. So I think it is important that it's not only young sports people who are given the capacity to talk about their vulnerabilities, but that older people involved in all trades, when life is changing and when there are fundamental things that are fundamental to their existence, when those parameters change, it can be very unsettling and very difficult, and that's important stuff in life.
you keep saying stuff that evokes more questions and more conversation, but we'll have to do that another day because you mentioned imposter syndrome a few minutes ago as well, which is something that I wish people would talk about an awful lot more in the sense of I think we all have it and people just don't tend to say it. So thank you for all of your giving today because that was tremendous. One other piece I'm just going to mention, and we won't have time to talk about it, but Shane Brennan for the day that's in it. A divided nation still has sport as a unifier. American people are fired up about the Super Bowl, but often for reasons that have nothing to do with football. And, you know, he talks about it, a gnawing sense that the game, once a showcase for America's wonders, is becoming a window into its disintegrating social fabric.
It's an exceptional piece, as good a piece as there is in the paper today.
Yeah. I mean, enjoyed is definitely one word, and fascinated in another way, and really interested in another way in relation to the analysis as well around trying to get our head around everything that's happened over the last 3 or 4 days about the rugby. So thank you both very much for that.
Thank you.
Brilliant stuff. That's the Sunday Paper Review for today.
The Sunday Paper Review on Off the Ball.
Brought to you by Centra. Kick off with a cold one. Over 18s only. Drink responsibly. Get the facts. Visit drinkaware.ie.
This is News Talk.